Testing 1, 2, testing 1, 2. Let's do this. Testing 1, 2, testing 1, 2. Okay, screen share. Okay, testing, testing. We're going to go ahead and get started here. I've got, okay, good. All right, looks like only me on the Zoom session right now, only my one participant showing up, but I do want to go ahead and get started. I won't keep you on here for long. I do like it, by the way, if you're tuning in to this as a recording, I do like to have students on here. Remember to always check in the announcements section for the link to the Zoom session. I just click on that link and you should be in there. So we're going to go ahead and get started. If I have people here, we'll get started without people, but if I have people here, it's really nice to have some interaction rather than just listening to my voice the entire time. I don't really prepare for that per se. I do like to have students in and I'll talk for a few moments and then I'll get some feedback from the students, give you an opportunity to ask questions or get clarification or add your input to the discussion, whether you may agree or disagree. So anyway, we're going to start with our course here in psychology. My guess is that many of you have not taken very many psychology courses. Typically, this course, general psychology, is the first or one of the first courses you take in psychology in most cases, unless you've gone to other universities or you have a real interest in psychology. Some of the things that we're going to talk about in here might be a little bit new to you. I'm not going to go over every slide. The slides are put there for you to go over and read and pick up some things. But I do want to touch on a few things here. You know, we could speak for 4 hours. I definitely will not be doing that. But general psychology is what some people call a survey course. And what that means is, well, depending on who you talk to, generally you're going to go over a great many things in psychology. It's not even everything that psychology covers, but it's several things. And there's a wide range of topics, even under the umbrella of psychology. I like to call it the long arm of psychology. And as you'll see, as we get into it in the next 6 weeks or so, the different aspects of psychology, whether we're going to talk about counseling, or we're going to talk about educational psychology, or we're going to talk about testing and assessment, or interpreting dreams, or how to make the workplace a better place with psychological science, personality, family psychology. There's countless areas and sub areas of psychology that we can get into, but let's start with basically what it means. And this is not unimportant when I say the scientific study of mind and behavior. A lot of times, you know, people, there are a few different definitions of psychology, but people say it is the study of behavior and mental processes. Another way to say that is basically here on our PowerPoint slide, the scientific study of mind and behavior. And what's important about that is, let's not lose sight of the fact that this is a scientific study. A lot of times psychology is called a soft science compared to, say, biology and chemistry and physiology. That is kind of a backhanded compliment or kind of a shot at people in social sciences to say that social sciences are quote unquote soft sciences. I like to call them essential sciences because, you know, you need what the social sciences have to offer. You need to be able to resolve conflicts. You need to be able to understand behavior. You need to be able to understand emotions. You need to be able to motivate people. So I call them essential sciences. But whatever the case may be, don't let anyone ever tell you that psychology is not a science, because it is. The word psychology comes from two Greek words, psych and logos. Psych or psyche is meaning life. That means means life, and logos means explanation. So explaining life is one way to look at psychology. So again, I can't overemphasize that psychology is a science. A lot of times people say that psychology is just common sense. And, I can definitely see their point sometimes, and sometimes it is, but that's a coincidence when it happens. Psychology is a science, okay? So we can't just trust our intuition. Now we can get into a little bit deeper conversation and talk about gut feelings, and we do have serotonin in our digestive tract, which is also in our brain. So, that's beyond this lecture and beyond this discussion. But we can't just say, well, it just made sense to do that, because a lot of times things that make sense don't hold up to scientific rigor. I'll give you an example. In the area of social science, Robert Cialdini, who you'll be reading a little bit about in this course, as well as if you take social psychology, he points out that what sometimes makes sense is not the most effective. For example, prisoners, wanting to get along with their, their guards, if you will, or their innkeepers, and their gatekeepers, if you will. There's something called the Stockholm syndrome, where prisoners start to identify more with their captors than they do with their country of origin or their group of origin, and they start to really have sympathy for their own captors. It doesn't make any logical sense. We see this a lot when kids are kidnapped or abused, even adults are abused. You would think, well, gosh, how can this be that this person has been living in this house, quote unquote, as a captive for 15 years? They surely had a chance to escape, and surely they did. But psychologically speaking, they did not feel that escape was either safe, or that they identified with their captor. They didn't feel it was in their best interest to escape. I mean, that's just one small example that we could spend, the entire 6 weeks just studying that. The other thing that is kind of proves that psychology is not just common sense is the Genevieve case. That's come under some scrutiny recently, but you'll read about that in the coming weeks. It's where many people watched someone getting mugged, if you will, in New York, and they looked out their windows, but no one called the police for help. Well, it seems like it seems like the more people that watch something, the more the higher the chances, the greater the chances are that someone will intervene or someone will call for help. The fact of the matter is, the fewer people that are witnessing something go wrong, if you will, that increases the risk, or the likelihood, I should not risk, but the likelihood that someone will call it. There's something called the bystander effect. If there's a large group of people, everyone thinks the other person or someone else in the group is going to call, or they're looking for their cues of how to behave, watching other people, and no one's doing anything. So psychology is a science. It doesn't just follow common sense. And we use the scientific method like anything else. There are research psychologists and psychologist practitioners. Research psychologists do experiments, create new knowledge, where psychological practitioners are like counselors and educators and things, professions like that. They take what has been learned from the research psychologists and apply it to help people become better citizens, become more functional, become healthier. become more effective in their family and in their job and other, as well as in society. Okay. Some of the challenges of studying psychology, again, a lot of times you think this is common sense. One of the challenges of teaching psychology is kind of goes hand in hand with that, because a lot of times people, as students in a class, will hear about, you know, kind of a psychological fact, let's say like the bystander effect that I just mentioned a few minutes ago, and they'll have this one example that where, you know, that didn't happen. And that, you know, that's certainly possible. But what we look at when we look at science, we look at the overwhelming, you know, preponderance of evidence. You know, if you conduct an experiment and you get the same results 99 out of 100 times, that's pretty good. That's pretty good with, hold on one second, please. I don't know if you heard that. The announcement came over, so that maybe you didn't hear that. I hope not. Anyway, it's kind of loud. Anyway, ooh, let's see. Okay, so so you know, when, you know, and it can be argued that psychology is even a tougher science than, say, biology or Corey. Just, I guess, came on here. Hello, Corey. Hey, Corey, can you hear me? I see that Corey came on. I'm not sure if it's first name or last name, Corey. I don't know the roster that well yet. Anyway, I'm going to go ahead. Corey, let's see here. Type in here. Okay, so I just typed the message to Corey, so hopefully Corey will text me back in there. Anyway, I'm going to go ahead. So as I was saying, it could be argued that the social sciences, psychology and sociology, things of that nature, anthropology even, are even a tougher science than, say, the biology and the chemistry, because we have less control over our, okay, Corey can hear me. If you can turn your microphone there, Corey. Anyway, so when you're dealing with people, there's a lot of other variables that you don't see necessarily in a lab. I use this example often. Okay, so you have we all know the chemical makeup of water is 2 parts hydrogen, 1 part oxygen. Hey, Corey, how are you?
Good. How are you?
I'm very good. Thanks for logging in. I definitely appreciate it. I'm just kind of going through the lecture here. Is this your first psychology course, Corey?
Yes.
Okay, terrific. You'll see if you tune into the first part of this on the recording, maybe if you get a chance. I was mentioning that for many students, that's the case. General psychology is the first or one of the first courses that they take. So I'm going to kind of go through, Corey, and I might ask you some questions along the way, just to get your feedback on it. And I just, you know, there won't be any sort of, there might be a wrong or right answer, but don't feel under any pressure. There shouldn't be any pressure. I'll you know, guide you along the way if you get stuck. So I was just saying about the psychology being a science that in a laboratory we have 2 parts hydrogen, 1 part oxygen, and we always know that's water. And you can kind of control that in a laboratory. Where with people, you really can't bring them in a laboratory, so you can't control the variables quite as much, or not nearly as much, I should say. So you have to conduct these experiments out in the open. People have different feelings, people have different ideas, they come in with emotions and different things like that, and they can change their mind. So when you get an experiment in social science to work, 80, 85, 90 times, you can pretty much say that, most of the time this is going to happen. Like in the Stanford prison experiment, people dressed up like guards, others dressed up like prisoners, and they began to take on those roles. So we can kind of draw a lot of conclusions from that. If people dress a certain way for work, they may behave a certain way for work as well. So, but nonetheless, studying psychology does have those drawbacks. Like you can't always guarantee all the variables, and that's probably the most succinct way to put it. I think I like what the slide says here. Behavior is mutually determined. It is produced by many factors. So I like how they frame it here. Psychology has changed. Most psychology books will tell you that the science of psychology began in the mid-1800s with Wilhelm Wundt. Wilhelm Wundt is a German guy. You're going to see his name come up on a slide here in just a moment. And most, especially general psych books, will tell you that's kind of the birth of psychology. I do like how this course does say and point out that we didn't really call it psychology per se. We had people talking about the mind and people talking about people's behaviors, many, many years ago, going back to Socrates and Aristotle and all number of philosophers and even religious leaders. So, that really is where psychology began. It's really always been here. That's important. And I'm going to talk about a couple of folks in just a minute. Most psychologists today are now women. That's a change in the last 30 or 40 years, I guess, and certainly in my lifetime. I'm 57 years old. When I was very young and just started studying psychology, the predominant number of psychologists were overwhelmingly men. Corey, I'm going to throw one out to you here, so it's just not me talking. When you hear terms like, nature versus nurture, and, is behavior, is it the way we're born, or is it based on our environment? What's your experience been? Do you have any ideas about that? Do you have any hypotheses, Corey? Corey, are you there? Okay. Corey may not be able to hear me, or he may have stepped away for just a second. But these are questions that often come up in the study of psychology. And again, when I'm 57 years old, and when I first began studying psychology, there was this rather strong debate. Is our behavior based on, is it the way we're born? Is it the way we're born? Can we change our behavior, or just that's our genes? We're just meant to behave either, pleasantly. Is it our personality? Are we aggressive? Or is it nurture? Is it based on our environment? Is it based on the way our parents raise us and the country we live in and the time of life that we live in, or the time in history, I should say, that we live in? Hold on one second, please. Thankfully now, most philosophers and psychologists have come to an agreement that it is neither all nature or all nurture. It is a combination of both nature and nurture. There's very few people that are going to have a disagreement with that whatsoever. We are certainly born a certain way. We have a genetic makeup, and that definitely impacts our behavior and our outlook on life. But we are also influenced by the way our parents raise us, the reinforcers that we get, and other various factors, nutrition, and even the time period in which we live. We're getting ready right now. Let's see, it's 2018. We're going to graduate from high school this year. For the most part, last year, this year, next year, these graduating classes from high school, these people that are stepping into the adult world now, that are 18 years old, or they're going to go to college, or they're going to get a job, or they're going to go into the military. This is the first group of kids in America that have really never lived in a pre-9/11 world, and never will. So that has determined a lot of how they see the world and how they behave. So anyway, there's that. This goes hand in hand with our free will or determinism. We have a free will. Can we make our own choices in life, or are we destined? Do our genes and our parents and our ancestry determine whether or not we're going to be any good or not? In other words, some people say, well, I can't help it. My parents, they were always angry too, so that's why I'm angry. It's part of my gene. My parents were alcoholics. I have a gene that makes me an alcoholic. Or, I was destined to live, in a poor neighborhood because that's part of my heritage, my physical makeup. I'm not very smart. I'm not very talented. Or do we have free will to make choices to get a better education, to change our circumstances? Clearly, if we're going to look at this from a Christian perspective, there has to be some agreement that at least part of what we have is free will. I think you'll not find any theologian to really disagree, any Christian theologian or any theologian that understands Christianity for that matter, to disagree that God gave us free will. That doesn't mean that we're not influenced by our parents' genes and our makeup. It's also sometimes students will bring up the text in the Bible that says the sins of the father carry on for generations, and that also is very true. Let me see something here. Okay, I got someone else someone's listening on the phone. I'm not sure who this is. It's a numbers there, 937. Can you hear me? I'm not sure. It doesn't have a name on there. I got Corey is listening on the Zoom, and I have a phone number here that starts with a 937. Can you hear me?
Yes.
You can?
Yeah, this is Cheryl.
Hey, Cheryl. Thanks for calling in here. I definitely appreciate it. And I guess you just logged in here. What do you think? Are we more influenced by the way we're born, like from our parents, from say nature, or are we more influenced by our environment? If you have any idea about that at all, any thoughts on that?
Well, I think a lot of people are influenced by their parents. I know my daughter is usually influenced by me and my husband. And we also, try to teach her, to look at things, not necessarily differently, but to try and be her best judgment, use her best judgment in anything she does.
So Cheryl, you thank you for that input. I definitely appreciate it, and I definitely appreciate your active, intentional parenting that you're talking about. But you just did what a lot of students do. What you actually were referring to was actually nurture, not nature. So because what you talked about was how you try and influence her and you try and guide her. So that is good, and I think you're right on the money with that. But that is nurturing. Nature would be the genes that your children have, or your daughter, I think you mentioned, has. Any kind of predisposition to illness they have, or maybe her IQ is measured by Stanford tests and things like that is high because both mom and dad have a high IQ. So whatever that might be, even going down to skin color, eye color, hair color, those kind of things. We even get into things like curling your tongue. That's a hereditary. I can't do it. My kids can do it. My wife can do it. So they got that gene from her, where you can actually, you may have done this in school, when you're in grade school, whatever. I won't do it here, but you stick out your tongue and see if you can curl it up and both sides meet. It's that is, you can't learn that. Either you have that gene to do that, or you don't. So anyway, thanks for chiming in with that, though, Cheryl. I appreciate it.
Mhm.
Okay, yeah, I mentioned this before, like, the Greek philosophers and other European philosophers, those really were the first psychologists. Not everyone is going to concur with me on that, but if you really look at it, you really have to tip your hat, even though they were philosophers, based on what they had to work with and what they were talking about, really is the beginnings of psychology. Now, the early psychologists did not conduct research to support their arguments. Again, they were more like philosophers. But they had, when you look at what they wrote about, they certainly had sort of a lot of validation to what they talked about. Now, on this slide here, I do want to point this out. A couple things that you definitely, these are sort of Psych 101 musts, if you will. There's two psychologists named on this slide, and I presume you can see the slide. If not, you can see it in your course room. And I mentioned this fella a few minutes ago, Wilhelm Wundt, or we could say Wilhelm Wundt. He was the sort of first psychologist with a laboratory, and he measured reaction time of people. So he was actually gathering data and observable, something you could observe and measure. And he was in Germany. The first American psychologist was William James. Those are two names you should probably remember coming out of a Psych 101 course if you're ever at a psychology cocktail party or whatever in the future. Those names you definitely want to know in case, excuse me, in case it comes up in conversation. Yeah, as I mentioned, Wundt measured reaction time. Tishner is best known as a structuralist. He was a student of Wundt, and he founded the first lab in America. I believe that's credited with Tishner at Cornell University. One of the things I just, yeah, and I'm going to get this, here we are. So, when people think of psychology, one of the first names, maybe the first name that comes to mind, is Sigmund Freud. Now, he differs from Wundt because Wundt was measuring reaction time. Sigmund Freud was really trying to treat, anxiety above everything else. So he learned about a talk therapy and hypnotism from some other people. He was a physician, and he used medications, but he wasn't having success with medication. So he came along and he found out that just talking about problems and helping people discover different things, obviously a lot more than that, helped alleviate anxiety, which is one of the, and still today is one of the, in fact, probably more today, one of the major issues in psychological health. So, some people really don't care much for Freud. They think he was kind of a lunatic, if you will, even to the extreme. Some people think he's really great. The fact is, you really have to give Freud some credit. Some of the ideas he had are pretty much out there, but he had nothing from which to build. He had no one come before him and help him, he had no one put some theories out there that he could sort of revise and make better. He had to go from the bottom up. And even today in psychotherapy, we do like to hear about people's dreams. That's totally from Freud. He was the first one to talk about that. But we do, and not just in psychoanalysis, but in other forms as well. We talk about dreams. We also talk about relationships with mothers and fathers. That's also very important to Freud. Um, so that, as well as development, like how, when did you start walking and when did you start, eating solid food and not having the bottle and things like that. Those things really all came from Freud. Now, Freud had a lot of people come after him. He took him, for at first, no one really followed him. And then he started to get a little, very close knit group of people, including Erickson and Jung and Alfred Adler and some others. And, then he had it was very like a little society that he had. And you had to be very loyal to Freud, which is another thing that, kind of odd. Carl Jung was the first one to follow him who was not Jewish, and Freud thought that really was a big step for his little group, because now the other part, the world is starting to accept and realize the things that he has to offer. He wanted to go back and sort of revisit and rebuild the problems that a person had in childhood, and thought if we could get past those, that they could alleviate their anxiety. And to some extent, that's been validated in the way some people still approach it. A lot of times, that's not the way people go now. But most people are cognitive behavioral now. We're getting a little bit more. But if you were in his little secret society and you went against him, you were out. You had to be 100% for him, or then he didn't care much for you. He was very strict like that. The other thing I was going to say about his society, I mentioned about Carl Jung. Anyway, others came along and followed him. Jung was the first one, like I said, who was not Jewish, but others still, lean on him and look to some of the things that he talked about. Then we get into behaviorism. After a while, people, Freud talked about the unconscious and dreams. Then psychology had another wave come, and people said, well, you can't measure the unconscious and you can't even see it. We have to be able to see things. So that's when behaviorism came along. And the names with behaviorism are Skinner, Pavlov, and Watson. Those are three names that you'll want to keep in mind when you're talking about behaviorism as it relates to psychology. So let's go through a few things here. Oh, I did want to I mentioned this early on. Some of you weren't on here. There's many disciplines in psychology: social psychology, family psychology, sports psychology, educational psychology, and others. They have some overlap, of course, but many different applications for it. So we're going to talk about several of those as we go along in this 6 weeks. It has here the different careers and things like that you may be interested in, or if you're interested in those careers, how psychology can help you. My voice is kind of kicking out here, guys. I won't keep you on here long, but I'm so thankful that I think Cheryl and Corey were able to check in with me here. Any questions or closing comments, Corey or Cheryl, before I go?
I don't.
Okay. I'm gonna obviously Cheryl and Corey, you're gonna get. I think we get 2 points. In fact, I'm sure it is 2 points if you log in. Extra credit points, which are actually pretty good points because they just add on to the total of your score. So you'll get your points. I'll put those in next day or two. And obviously we'll put this on YouTube. I'll share the link in the announcements section. So anyone who does watch this on a recording will also get the points. If you watch this as a recording, you're going to have to tell me the Bible verse I'm going to give you right now. We're going to go with Genesis 1:1. Why not start in the beginning? If you watch this and you go in the message tab and tell me that Genesis 1:1 is the Bible text or Bible verse that I gave you to get credit for this watching the Zoom, then I will indeed go and give you credit. But without further ado, nothing else. Remember, you can certainly get in touch with me through the message tab. That's the best way, as I mentioned. Any questions or concerns you have, that's the best way. And keep up with the discussions and your application and your application assignment and your quizzes and things like that. Other than that, I'm going to say a quick prayer and check off for us. Father in heaven, thank you so much for this time together. I pray for Cheryl and her family. I pray for Corey and his family as well, and all the students as well as their family. I pray that you'll watch over us, guide us, give us the wisdom that you would like us to have according to your will and as we pursue this. I know that, Father, you have a purpose for each person, each of your children that you create. And I pray that you will continue to bless us, to guide us to that purpose so that we can be the people that you want us to be and serve your purpose here on this earth that you have laid out. All these things I pray in Jesus' name. Amen. All right, folks, thanks so much for tuning in. I'm going to log out, and I will see you in the course room.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you both.